Ralph certainly has a lot of imagination.
Oh, yeah, the kid's incredible. I mean, the special schools are all over him.
Maybe he needs some real friends.
Sure, we'd all love some real friends, Marge, but what are the odds of that happening?
Hello, Ralph. When I was little, I used to play by myself, too.
Today's video, I'm going to show you how history should not be approached and how anybody can come along and just say whatever they want with no basis at all and just make things up and sell books. And I'm not talking about Dan Brown. I'm talking about con men, snake oil salesmen. Ralph Ellis, for those who don't know who this guy is a sociopathic historian, in quotes, a man who doesn't do history or do scholarship, but he rapes scholarship, rapes history, says what he wants, puts it down in a book as if putting something on a book makes it true. When he's not on the internet talking about how COVID is a setup by Dr. Fauci and that climate change is not real, there is no rising sea levels, just ignore all the scientists, because Ralph Ellis, a man with no PhDs, no master's degree, no scholarship, failed multiple peer reviews, complains about failing peer reviews. This is the guy you should listen to. Everything you see is fake. We have entered the fake age. Mankind has passed through the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, the Steam Age, the Jet Age, Semiconductor Age, and now entered the fake age, where nothing in this mainstream media can be believed. Not one single item about politics, climate, COVID, society, or history. Here's Ralph Ellis saying that black teachers cannot pass a 6th grade math test. And the problem is a serious one. In fact, tragic for millions of black people because they are expected to perform and excel within someone else's culture. It's an injustice to those black students whose parents sacrifice everything to give them an education while they sit in school pretending to be students, yet they are not allowed to sit for exams because they may spoil the education minister's fake results. This is why black economic empowerment was created, where blacks are supposedly empowered by placing them in visibly prominent positions in already existing enterprises. Here's Ralph literally complaining about women becoming airline pilots, blaming a tragic plane crash on women using too much perfume. And in my estimation, these 66 lives were lost due to regulatory inaction. In this case, they did not want to broach the culturally sensitive question of Islamic customs and traditions, the use of ethanol for hand washing, nor did they want to criticize the rise of female commercial pilots who tend to spray ethanol-based perfume in far greater quantities than male pilots ever did. He's literally blaming a plane crash on the rise of women pilots. I mean, complaining over whose actor plays Cleopatra because she must have had red hair. Just ignore all those islands that disappeared. Like, those islands didn't exist. That's all fake news. All those islands that disappeared because of rising sea levels. No. I got the real graph right here. I got the real graph. Rising sea levels, that doesn't happen. I'm the guy who knows everything. After years of scare stories about tropical cyclones getting stronger and more frequent, we at last have an analysis that tells us the inconvenient truth, that numbers of tropical cyclones have been reducing for 100 years. So as you see, he has a bunch of diagrams about why climate change is false, how all the scientists are wrong, or how COVID is fake, complaining about why Jesus is not black, he's white. Let's not even entertain the thought that there could be a Semitic race that are dark-skinned, and it's either white or black for Ralph. He's either black or he's white, and he's definitely not black. Obsessed with DNA, obsessed with what color of skin these people in ancient history were, obsessing over it. Obsessing over Black Lives Matter. We have touched on some of these topics already. Destruction of history, Black Jesus, slavery, corrupt academia, environmentalism, Black Lives Matter, Greta the Gremlin,
calling a teenage girl a gremlin, Attenborough the abhorrent and biased broadcasting society. More evidence pointing to a fraud Fauci. Dr. Fauci created COVID-19. What really happened in Wuhan? Have we been attacked? And don't get me started on climate. Did you know that the number of strong tornadoes has been decreasing in the last 65 years? Like, it's one thing to like doubt the severity of climate change, but to actually like try to reverse it and say climate's getting better, that's just madness. The COVID cover-up. Joe Biden is a fascist dictator. Trump, the unstable, tyrannical, warmongering president. Oh, wait a minute.
Here he is saying the United States election was hacked and that the election was stolen. Trump actually won.
Is peer review broken? Having been through the science peer review process, my Ice Age science paper, I have to announce that I am deeply unimpressed with the entire process. The first dent in my confidence came from the Royal Society reviewer announcing that the most important and detrimental aspect of my paper on Ice Ages was that I had unusual interest in Egyptian and biblical history. Now, to me this sounds like bullshit. I don't think this is even what happened. This doesn't sound like a story that's true. Like he's making the story up. I think he submitted his peer review and failed. And he's making up a narrative about it to say that they're biased against him because of his interest in Egyptian and biblical history. And then he says that they're wrong. The so-called scientist who does not know the difference between a gas concentration and a gas partial pressure, but then uses his or her ignorance to reject my paper.
Here he is calling the gay community vociferous. Basically a noisy, loud, crazy community stepping into the road and tugging its forelock before Islam. Why no gay pride demonstration through London protesting the brutality of ISIS against gays?
Black Jesus. King Solomon was white-skinned with red cheeks. Queen Tyre was redhead. Alexander the Great was a redhead. Helen of Sparta, blonde. Pharaoh Ramses, ginger hair. If you can see, people like him and Robert Seffer that just care about making white people better than everyone else. That's just like kind of what they do. Jesus was a ginger. Below is a very early image of Jesus, complete with ginger hair.
Now, I want to go back to this post where he says that everything's fake with the charts of the climate change stuff that he's got in there. And notice on the right, there's an image of a guy from a mosaic. Now, he uses this image all over his Facebook posts. He's constantly throwing this image up. And every time he uses this image, as I'm showing you, he says this is Jesus. And he says it's an early image of Jesus. But it's not. It's a 5th century mosaic from Israel. And it's not Jesus. No one has ever said that it was Jesus. Only Ralph is saying that, and he's assuming that you don't know what this is and hiding the ball behind his back as he lies to you.
Jesus was a ginger. Below is a very early image of Jesus, complete with ginger hair.
Nobody has ever said this is Jesus. It's either Alexander the Great or Antiochus, and scholars are split between the two. But nobody, and I'm going to demonstrate as for you why these scholars think this, nobody thinks this is Jesus. In fact, this is a good case study on what kind of person Ralph is and what kind of methodology he uses.
I'm going to tell you something first. There's actually a joke among scholars. And sometimes in scholarship, when we find things like this, we'll find, I'm just going to give you an example that I made up. There was a tomb, let's say there was a tomb found in the sands of Arabia somewhere. And no one knows who these tombs are or who the people buried in them are. Now, what would happen is an archaeologist who found these tombs would get together a scholar who could read the languages that's on the tombs, who could read the alphabets or whatever language is on these tombs, then find another scholar who can decipher the artwork that's in these tombs, another scholar who does radiocarbon stuff. They would get a bunch of people together, all the best specialists, people who have 25 years experience, emeritus professors, PhDs, and they'd get them all together and they'd brainstorm and they'd find out what this thing is. See, Ralph Ellis has become a verb. To Ralph Ellis something is to just not only speculate, but to speculate on steroids. Or I'll give you an example. Instead of getting all those scholars together to find out who made those tombs, Ralph Ellis will just look at it from the internet, from an article that he found, and he'll say, I think I know what it is. Well, look at the face on that picture of the tomb. His hair looks kind of straight. So therefore, since the king of Edessa has straight hair also, they might be the same person. Oh, I've cracked the code. That's it. Case closed. But Ralph, what about the language that's on here? The linguist says this is what it is. No. They're lying to you. See, they have an agenda, and I don't.
45 seconds till pencil's down.
Lisa, what's the answer to number 7? Sorry, Ralph. That would defeat the purpose of testing as a means of student evaluation. My cat's name is Mittens.
3, 2, 1, and that's pencils down.
What was Christopher Columbus actually looking for when he discovered America?
Ralph, this better not be about your cat.
Ralph Ellis is saying that this is Jesus when all the scholars agree that this is either Alexander the Great by King Antiochus. See, NationalGeographic.com. Mysterious mosaic may portray Alexander the Great. Dating to the 5th century AD, the mosaic depicts between two high-ranking male figures, one of who appears to be general leading his troops. It's very frequent in late antiquity that early Byzantine art figures in mosaics and other media that are labeled, says Karen Britt, an art historian at Western Carolina University, excavations and mosaic expert. The fact that these are not labeled makes it confounding for modern viewer. The scene includes elephants outfitted for battle, a detail that immediately suggests the story of Maccabees, Judean leaders who mounted a revolt against the Seleucid Empire in the mid-2nd century BC. But excavation director Jody Magnus, an archaeologist of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, has a different interpretation. She believes the leader of the army is none other than Alexander the Great himself. His meeting with the high priest of Jerusalem never happened, but it was a piece of historical fiction that would have been very familiar to the residents of Hukok. Magnus believes that the mosaic should be read from bottom to top. In her view, the lowest tier register depicts one of the many battles that Alexander the Great fought as he expanded his empire into the eastern Mediterranean. The middle register shows the Jerusalem high priest, older, bearded, man in the center, accompanied by nobles or high priests, all at the city's gates. The top register, the high priest and his companions meet Alexander and his troops. Alexander has all the attributes of a Greek king and a military commander, such as the purple cloak, ribbon around his head, called the diadem. We already are narrowing this thing down. This is either a Seleucid king or Alexander the Great. Nobody, not one single person, has even thought this would be Jesus. The fact that Ralph is thinking this is Jesus is just bonkers. And why does he think that? Because his Jesus King of Edessa looks like that. So he uses a speculation that makes no sense, that's baseless, that Jesus was the king of Edessa, and then throws on top of that speculation, we found a mosaic that might look like what his Jesus, the king of Edessa, would look like. So what he does is brings it to Facebook and has hundreds of posts just claiming that this is Jesus, and everyone agrees with him, that there's no debate here, that this is the truth. This is what a madman does. This is what an insane person does. Britt and Raynon Rosti at UCLA History of Religion Specialist, who's also a member of the excavation team, has spent the past 2 years consulting ancient literature. They interpret the mosaic as a depiction of Seleucid attack on Jerusalem by King Antiochus. Britt and Boosted read the mosaic from bottom to top, but their interpretation, the lower register, depicts a battle with Seleucid soldiers. The middle register, Judean youths stand with their hands and their swords, ready to take on any invaders. The top register is John Hyrcanus I, and on the left, and on the right, Antiochus. Now, Ralph Ellis opposes this viewpoint, and his reason why, drum roll, because Alexander would have been clean shaven, he says. Which is actually false, because according to the story that were given down by Arian, Diodorus of Sicily, Pseudo-Callisthenes, and others, Alexander the Great doesn't tell his people to shave their beards until after he is facing off with Darius. He goes and meets the Jews before he gets to Egypt. So at this point, he would still have his beard. In fact, the Greeks held high regard beards. Now, why is Alexander always depicted as clean-shaven? Because it's hindsight, and he's a young man. He died at age 32. So you would depict him as a young man. You wouldn't depict him as an old man. He died as a young man. That's what he's depicted as. This has nothing to do with him being clean-shaven or not. Ralph Ellis does not understand that there's more than one legend about King Alexander meeting the Jews. According to Ralph, the only story we get is by Josephus. That's not true, though. The Greek Alexander romance has a long, elaborated legend about Alexander meeting the Jews, and this legend was popular in the 5th century. And the story of Alexander the Great meeting the Jews goes like this. In the meantime, Alexander ordered his general Seleucus. Seleucus gathered the troops together. On the way to Egypt, reached Judea. The Jews wanted to resist him and sent out spies. See? There's the Jews who wanted to resist him to send out spies, who presented themselves as ambassadors. But Alexander was not deceived. He ordered some of them, the most warlike young men of the Macedonian phalanx, there's a phalanx right there, to ambush them in a nearby ravine. They hastened to carry out their orders. The Macedonian troops were always swift to obey Alexander. Then he turned the whole would-be spies. See, he said, you ambassadors of the Jewish race, death is nothing to a Macedonian soldier. Go, therefore, and do what is appropriate. I shall come to you tomorrow, and shall do whatever is approved by providence above. So then the leaders go back to Jerusalem to tell them about the meeting with Alexander. When the leaders heard about what happened, they gave orders to surrender to Alexander. The priests dressed themselves in priestly white robes and went out to meet him together with a multitude of followers. When Alexander saw them, he was frightened at their appearance and ordered them to approach no further, but to return to the city. Then he summoned one of the priests. There's Alexander, one of the priests. Your appearance is like that of the gods. Tell me, what god do you worship? I have never seen priests of any of your gods dressed like this. We serve one God, the priest replied, what made heaven and earth and all that is visible and invisible. No mortal can discover him. Alexander then replies, you are worthy priests of the true God. Responded Alexander, go in peace. Your God shall be my God, and my peace shall be with you. I shall not treat you as I have done to other nations, because you are servants of the living God. Then they brought quantities of gold and silver to Alexander. Let these gifts, as well as the tribute, I decree, be dedicated to the Lord God. And then Alexander offers a sacrifice. This is a spitting image of the mosaic. If Ralph was actually really trying to find out the truth and not just trying to sell books, he would have asked one of these scholars why they came to this conclusion, and they would have pointed him to the romance. But no, he just assumes they're talking about Josephus, because Josephus is the only book Ralph thinks that exists for some reason. So he just doesn't understand. And Ralph's lack of understanding is why he gets so much shit wrong. He just doesn't know the sources. He has no idea what he's doing. And it just amazes me how he can use this image, who everyone knows is either Alexander the Great or Antiochus. It's one of the two. And he just says it's Jesus and just goes with it. He posts this picture all over his Facebook and just assumes that you think it's Jesus too. Jesus was a ginger. Below is the very early image of Jesus. No, it's not. It's from 5th century. It's from the 5th century. We have images of Jesus that date to the 2nd and 3rd century, and he doesn't have that beard. He's the one who's beardless. He doesn't look like a Roman soldier. He has a white robe. It's just so funny. We have images of Jesus that predate this, even if this was Jesus. It's still 5th century, but it's not. This is just a crazy person.
And of course, this tradition flows through into the biblical story. And here is Jesus the barbarian with the same long hair and beard that the Adiabenans used to wear.
The bulk of his books are dependent on one lie that breaks them all into pieces. These books can be thrown into the trash just because of this one fact alone. I asked him about Jesus. Where do you get this name Jesus from? Because the king that he thinks is Jesus is Izates. He's not Isis. He's Izates. His name is Izad in Arabic, not Isis. In Hebrew, Zotos. So where do you get that his name is Isis from? So Ralph decides to tell me that it's, don't worry, I have it, but I don't have it on me right now. As you can see in this clip. It says, why do you call him Isis if his name is Izates?
Because Josephus calls him Isis. So yes, his name is Izates. That's his royal name. But Josephus gives him a nickname, as Josephus often does, and his nickname is Isis. And you will not get that. You will not get that from the English.
Can I ask you what chapter that is? It's in Josephus, you said?
Yeah, it's in the works of Josephus. Now, you have to look at it in the Greek because it will not give you that in the translation. In the translation, he's always called Izates. And it's just interesting because, of course, that may well be the original name for Jesus because in the East, well, in the Greek, he's called Eusus, which doesn't sound like Joshua or Yeshua very much at all. And, of course, in the East, he's known as Issa. The Arabic name for Jesus is Issa. And it's much more likely that that comes from Isis.
You're saying Izates is called Isa? Izates?
Isis. Isis is the short name.
Okay. All right. What I just want to. I'm just trying to look at this up. Which book is this now? This is book.
It'll probably be in Antiquities. Let's see if I can look it up for you.
Okay. I just want to see this. It says, well, this one says Izates with the T.
Mm-hmm. He's named on a number of occasions in that book, so you've got quite a few accounts to look at. Okay, so for this one, I can't find it, but maybe it's a different one. I'll send you the link later. So,
okay. All right.
But I can assure you, he is called he is called Jesus.
Okay. I'll just take your word for it then.
I'll send you a link later.
Yeah, sure. And then I said to Ralph, if you could please show me where you got this information from, I will post it to my Facebook and my community tab, and I will say, Ralph is right. Izates really is called Isis. But Ralph never did such a thing. In fact, he tried to slip it by me, thinking maybe I was stupid enough to fall for it. He sent me one reference through one of the translations in Greek of the Jewish War, in which the name is shortened to Iza. It happens twice in the Greek. There's a whole list of manuscripts, as you can see I'm scrolling through here. Only one of them, which happens to be the one that's on Perseus Tufts, has this shortened Isa. Ralph adds the S to make it sound like Jesus. You're saying Izates is called Isa? Izates?
Isis. Isis is the short name.
You're saying Izates is called Isa? Izates?
Isis. Isis is the short name.
Izates?
Isis. Isis is the short name.
Isis is called Isa. Izates?
Isis. Isis is the short name.
Now, I went to a scholar, professional PhD professor who is a authority on Josephus and knows Greek and read classical Greek. And I asked him about this. Why is this name shortened to Iza? And he simply told me that a lot of time to fit on the page, they will take long names like Izates and just shorten it, and it's always 3 letters. There's other examples in Josephus, in this exact manuscript, where other names are shortened into 3 letters. It's simply taking the first 3 letters of the name and shortening it to that.
It's not a nickname. Izates was never called Isa or Isis. What Ralph has done is he's found a error in the translation and then adds an S to the name and makes him Isis. There is no such thing as Isis. He's not a person. It's not even a title. It's not even a nickname. The entire theory of Isis Manu doesn't even exist. Ralph claims that his name is Manu because of the Old Testament prophecy by Isaiah. His name will be Emmanuel, which is just nonsense. He's just making stuff up. With that being said, there is no Isis. Like, do we even have to continue at this point?
Talmud, or I can go into different texts. Even the Old Testament, you have a Jesus ben Sirach. You have Jesus, who's the high priest, and Zechariah.
Yeah, but that's a translation of Joshua.
That's what the name is.
Yeah, no, you see, I'm saying it's not.
In Hebrew, it's spelled exactly the same.
No,
Hebrew?
they linked it to Joshua because they wanted a name
Yod,
that sounded similar.
Yod, Shin, Ayin, Yod, Shin, Vav, Ayin. It goes,
but
Jesus, Joshua, Isus, whatever you want it to do, it's all the same in Hebrew.
We don't have any Aramaic New Testaments. We only have the Greek one. And he wasn't called that in the Greek one. Parthian name.
That's how you would translate Joshua into Greek.
No, they've said that because they want to link it up to the name of Jesus. I think that's a later transliteration because they wanted Jesus to be Jewish.
That's the name.
And therefore they linked it up to Joshua.
The name means Yahweh's salvation. It's the same name.
No, it does in the Hebrew for any of the Hebrew characters, but that does not mean that the Jesus character had that name. His name was Isis or Eusus in the Greek. It's not the same as Yeshua. I know that's difficult to grasp because they've made this link so strong between Yeshua.
No, that's not true. The name Yeshua is one of the highest names according to Philo. Everyone, this is a known thing. It's a name given to priests, and if you go to the Old Testament, it's spelled Yeshua in Hebrew. And when you get to Greek, it translates to Isus. The same name. Hold on, let me finish. The same name in the Septuagint that is Yeshua in Hebrew becomes Isus in Greek. It's the same name. That can demonstratable. Think about it. The name that's Yeshua in Hebrew, when you translate it into Greek, is Isus. The same name as Jesus in the Gospels. I can just I can show you that. You want me to show you?
Yeah, from the Septuagint. Yeah, probably.
So that's the name, though. That's the same name.
So then I decided to show Ralph a manuscript from the Dead Sea Scrolls that's in Greek, dated to the 1st century BCE. It's a manuscript of Zechariah. And sure enough, Isus is the translation for Jesus. And what does Ralph decide to do now? Say nothing. Just didn't stop responding to me after this. And this is when he started to attack me. He started to dig into my history and find videos of me as a Christian. He caught me, right? I laughed when I saw this. And that's why I decided to make this video, because I wasn't going to make this video. I don't really care about Ralph Ellis. I don't care what he's doing. I don't care about his books. If people are dumb enough to believe Ralph Ellis, then that's fine. That's on them. I don't really care. It's free market, in my opinion. And so I never cared. But when he did that, when he was posting old videos of me on Facebook, I said, I'm going to go look into his shit now. And that's when I started to find Ralph Ellis thinks that black teachers can't pass 6th grade math and that women are going to cause plane crashes if we hire them because they can't ride planes.
Here's Ralph showing me that there's different suffixes for the word Jesus in the New Testament without realizing the laws of Greek language have different nominative, dative, and genitive. And I tell him this and show him this, and then he says, oh, I was just testing you. And just to give you an example of how bad his linguistic skills are, in page 110 of his book King Jesus, he tries to say that the Essenes are the sons of Zadok, and the Galilean sect was founded by Zadok. But this is just demonstrably false, because Sadducees literally translates into Hebrew as Zadokim, sons of Zadok. The Sadducees are literally the sons of Zadok. Like, they're the priestly class. They're the Levites. So he's not only wrong, He's the opposite of right. It's the worst kind of wrong you can be. He's like this in every page of his book.
He thinks that there's a magic stone called the Elgabal, which will be made public after Scotland becomes independent and reaffirms its own destiny. The Scottish Templars possess an ancient sacred meteorite with powers of levitation and magnetism, merely custodians of an overgrown granite. And in his book, The Grail Cipher, Ralph Ellis talks about how Edessa had the stone, and when they had the stone, they were powerful. When they got rid of the stone and lost the stone, they were up to their own devices and then became conquered. As if the stone literally is magical. So then we had this whole Edessa Adiabeni thing. For whatever reason, Ralph is insisting, as a crazy madman, that Edessa equals Adiabeni. Now here's a map. Adiabeni's over here. Edessa's over here. And we know this from all the historians. Pliny the Elder, Strabo, Tacitus, Plutarch. We all know, we all have examples of where these people are and where these kingdoms are. There's no debate here on if these places are the same or not. But Ralph has decided, since there was a royal marriage between Adgaris and Helena, was from Edessa, and she married Adgaris from Adiabeni, there must be the same place. Even though oftentimes in medieval periods we have Queen of Spain marrying the King of England, as we had with Catherine and Henry, does that mean Spain is the same as England? Are they the same place? Why is this a thing in Ralph's head? Like, is he serious? So then he claims that Adiabeni and the Agbaric dynasty are Jews. He claims that the name Agbaris means chief of the exiles. But it doesn't. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, they are Nabatean rulers who got there in the 2nd century BCE. Ralph is saying that they scattered there in the 6th century BCE after the dispersion of the Jews from Nebuchadnezzar. But this is not true at all. See, there was a dispersion of the Jews. That's a true thing. They didn't become kings and queens of the areas they got dispersed to. They just became citizens and even slaves in some places. None of them were kings or queens of these lands. That did not happen. Pliny the Elder refers to Adiabeni as an Arab kingdom in the north. Plutarch says that Abgar II is an Arab phylarch. Tacitus says Abgar V is the king of the Arabs. J.B. Siegel, PhD, professor of Semitic languages, Abgar dynasty is undoubtedly Nabatean. None of these kings and queens are Jewish, they're Arabs. In fact, you can actually prove that and demonstrate that he's completely wrong about this, because we know the history of this area. The Persians ruled the lands and brought the Jews back to their second temple, and the dispersion occurred, but there were still Persian satraps that were ruling in the north. And when Alexander conquered them, they became Seleucids and Antigonids. And this was a complete Game of Thrones for the next 200 years, all the way down to Mithridates. And in 138, Mithridates conquers and gives the lands over to private monarchs, where the king of Edessa and Arsinoe, Ariu, came up out of the Nabatean kingdom in the south and ruled in 132 BCE. This is the first king of the Abgarid dynasty in 132 BCE. They're not a ruling monarchy of Jews that stem back to the dispersion, like Ralph says. This dynasty starts in 132 BCE. We have the history. We can trace it back there. They're not Jewish people. Which brings me to this video right here that Ralph says, who started the revolt?
Unless any of you, the Jews, extend his hopes beyond the Euphrates and suppose that those of your own nation who dwell in the Adiabeni will come to your assistance. But certainly they, that's the Adiabeni, will not embarrass themselves with an unjustifiable war against Rome. Nor, if they should follow such ill advice, will the Parthians admit them to do so. for it is their concern to maintain the truce that is between them and the Romans.
The citizens in these lands who are dispersed can come to your help, not the kings and queens. And so Ralph thinks the Jewish revolt was led by Jesus, who was dead in 30 AD. And he also equates with Izates, who's dead in 55 AD. Somehow they're the same guy. And then he says that Bar Kamsa is Jesus somehow, because Bar Kamsa in the Talmud offers up a blemished bull, and he says that this is what started the Jewish revolt. But that's false. It's demonstrably false, because not only does the Talmud not say what was Nero and Nero's wickedness, but even Josephus tells us this. Josephus, Book 2. Josephus lays out this story of how the Jewish revolt started. Gessius Florus went into the temple and stole gold and money, and the Jews were mad about this and revolted.
There's a conflict that develops because Nero is in financial trouble. And according to other sources, not Josephus, he begins to even tell his financial men, procurators, financial agents, to raid temples. And these are temples everywhere, even in Italy itself, right? Go around and take whatever you can get from the temples. We need money. Recall all the loans, recall every resource you can get. So after the Great Fire of Rome, of course, Nero wants to rebuild Rome. And so he has, like, his financial needs go through the roof, right? They skyrocket. He really needs to rebuild the city.
He's in trouble.
And he's really pressing everybody to get him money, resources. And that's the time, well, 64, 65, is when he sends this guy, Gessius Florus, as the procurator to Judea, and tells him, basically gives him carte blanche and says, just take money. Get money from the temple. You know, the temple in Jerusalem is known to be one of the wealthiest, maybe the wealthiest temple in the Roman Empire.
Wow.
Why? Can you, if you don't mind my asking you, as if you were in one of my classes,
Yeah.
Can you imagine why the Jerusalem temple would probably be wealthier than most other temples, like the thousands of temples throughout the empire?
Because they raise taxes
Yeah, from
the people, the Jews in the eastern side of the empire, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
and not only in the Roman Empire, but even Jews in the Parthian Empire. But then the question is, how do you respond? You know, like, use your noggin. You know, what's the safest way forward now? And here you have a whole spectrum of responses, right? So on one side, the impulsive response is, look, these are not Romans. These are these schmucks that have hated us for so long, these auxiliary fighters, right? We can take them on. You know, they're not such great stuff. We'll go arm ourselves. And so you have a split of factions led by different people, but one of them goes down to Masada, where King Herod had stored a bunch of weapons again being swords and clubs and staffs. And
That's just plain and simple. It's laid out for pages and pages, and details and in-depth analysis by Josephus, also in the Talmud, of how this happened. But Ralph just ignores that because that doesn't help his book. He needs the Parthians. He needs the Adiabene kings to be the ones that led this revolt. So he finds a verse in book 6, 2 books later, after years of events have gone down, a long time, lots of events have occurred in between these events. He finds one verse. So I just mentioned that Josephus' book 2 explains how the war started. But if you notice that Ralph is going all the way to book 6 and saying, look, the sons and brethren of King Izates. By the way, notice how he says sons and brethren of King Izates, not King Izates. Why? Because King Izates is dead. He's gone. He's been dead for 15 years at this point. And he besought Caesar Vespasian to give them his right hand in security. Vespasian kept them all in custody. So Ralph thinks that this means that Izates led the revolt when this is in book 6. This is 4 books after the revolt already started. This is just how a madman makes things up and just completely butchers history for his own gain. He doesn't ask any scholars if he thinks this is true. He doesn't consult anybody. He doesn't try to go through peer review. And in fact, he does try to go through peer review and fails and complains about it, as you see in this post right here. Look at the peer reviewers, they failed me. Oh my God. Now, I can go in depth on why these books are just complete nonsense. All you gotta do is read the back of his books. The back of the Grail cipher says that Jesus was the son of the king of Palmyra. St. Peter was the guardian of the Holy Grail. King Arthur had a battle with Vespasian. Mithra is actually Pompey killing Taurus, Mithridates. Just ignore that there is a Mithras in Persia and India going back for thousands of years, though that doesn't exist. Just ignore that. It's Pompey the Great. Pompey the Great is Mithras. Even though I've shown Ralph that Plutarch even tells us that Pompey conquered the pirates who were worshipping Mithra already. Plutarch literally tells us that in 67 BCE, before Roman religion of Mithras was even started, 6 years before Pompey the Great even returned back to Rome, he conquers the Parthian pirates who are worshipping Mithras, the Persian Mithras. See, Ralph doesn't understand this. This is the one thing that Ralph can look and say, look, there's a connection here, Mithra and Mithras. But no, for some reason, all these names that sound alike, Isis sounds like Isis, or Jesus sounds like Izates, his methodology for that, somehow when it comes to Mithra and Mithras, he doesn't see it. Which is kind of funny, actually, if you think about it. Then you have him talking about the Holy Grail being brought to Earth by aliens. For some reason, he has to throw in there Sir Galahad dressed as a woman. And the burial of Jesus, Arthur, who's also King Arthur, in no other than Stonehenge, England. See, Jesus went to England. How do I know that? I just made it up. That's what Ralph says. Is there any evidence of Jesus going to England? No, I just think that's where I live. I live in England. So Jesus has to come here. I have to be special. I want to tell you all the people who Ralph thinks is Jesus and all the people who Ralph thinks is Josephus. They're all the same person. I'm just going to give you a list and let you laugh at this. Jesus, son of Saphias. Jesus of Gamala. King Izates. Elisha from the Old Testament. Balaam. Samson. King Arthur. The teacher of righteousness. The Talmud Zadok. Hippocrates. The Egyptian false prophet. Basilides. Just some random guy walking by. That's Jesus. Yeshu ben Stada. Yeshu ben Pantera. Bar Kamza. Jesus ben Ananas. Jesus Justus. Unnamed survivor of a crucifixion in Josephus. Now, I think there's more than that, but those are the ones that I can think of right now. Then you get Josephus, who he thinks is Paul, Johanan ben Zakkai, Sir Lancelot, Josephus the Clerk, Darth Vader, the Dead Sea Scrolls Wicked Priest, Saulus, Gehazi, Joseph Barbas, Joseph of Arimathea, Zacchaeus, and those are all the same person. John the Baptist is Aristobulus III, John ben Matthias, Joseph Flavius' brother, who all lived in, by the way, all these people lived in different decades. They died in different decades. They live in different countries. They're not even close to even being considered to be the same person. But Ralph just fits them in there. For example, Elisha from the Old Testament. This is going to blow your mind how fucking dumb Ralph is. So since King Isis, who doesn't exist, wanted to be Caesar, okay? Just keep that in mind. King Isis wanted to be Caesar. He never became Caesar, obviously. But since he wanted to be Caesar, the fact that in the Old Testament, Elisha gets called Baldy before he sends a pack of mauling bears at these kids, he gets called Baldy by these kids, right? Well, Ralph says, since Julius Caesar was bald, and King Isis wanted to be a Caesar, and Elisha gets called Baldy, they're all the same person. I am not making this up.
Here is the page in Ralph's book where Ralph lays this down, that Elisha, who gets called Baldy, must be Jesus because Izates wanted to be Caesar and Caesar was bald. Just think about how fucking crazy that is. Ralph Ellis really loves to lie too. Like, he'll tell you that Professor Eisenman agrees with him on that Mary Magdalene is the same person as Martha Boethus. Professor Eisenman never said such a thing. Jesus of Gamala married Mary and Martha Boethius, who has been identified by myself as being the Bethany sisters. Robert Eisman never said that. Ralph just flat out made that up. Eisman has never once said that they time traveled and went back to the 30s. There's no time shift. It's just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs nonsense.
And what he'll do is he'll comment on videos of people like me or Derek or Jacob when we talk to real professors, like emeritus professors, Egyptologists, Syriologists, people who really know what they're doing, archaeologists, people who've been there, done that, where Ralph has done nothing like this. And he'll leave his comments in our videos trying to correct us, really embarrassing himself. Like, honestly, he doesn't even realize it. He doesn't have the awareness to see it, but he's really, really embarrassing himself. And he thinks that all religion is based off the precession of the equinoxes. That's all it is. He doesn't have any understanding of ancient religion or theology or philosophy. He doesn't understand any of it. He watched a couple documentaries about the precession of the equinox, which is literally like an ancient clock. It's all it is. There's nothing to do with religion itself. And so he points to these coins of Ptolemy and Alexander the Great having horns in their head because they worshipped Ammon. But he says it's because during the precession of the equinox, Aries the ram. Literally nobody says this. Even the text itself, the Alexander Romance, tells you that he had horns in his ears because he was the son of Ammon. Ptolemy also claimed descendancy from Ammon as well. We have the sources of the text. There's no need to doubt this. But Ralph just kind of says, no, I know more than you. He told me that Professor Grabby, who's an emeritus professor and studies Egypt, and denied Ralph's question of the Hyksos being the Hebrews, which is a centuries apart events. It's just, they're just not the same. And obviously Ralph just doesn't care about time. He just thinks it's all just, you can just move 2 centuries away and it's all the same, doesn't matter. Well, this professor, archaeologist, Egyptologist, and tells him, no, it's not the case. There's no evidence for an Exodus. No evidence for an Exodus. And the Hyksos explosion, they weren't Hebrews. They weren't even speaking Hebrew language. They're not the same people. This is way before the Hebrews even existed. Well, that's not enough. Ralph comes back and says, but I've studied precession of the equinox, and you haven't. That's why I know and you don't. Like, it's just the same. It's the same thing of the story of how he rejected his peer review. The people who do his peer review are wrong because they challenged him. Like, if he was right, then they're good. Anyone who accepts Ralph is very smart. Anyone who doubts Ralph is wrong somehow. And it reminds me of the story he tells about his peer review process, as if they're talking to each other and debating each other, as if his peer review was a debate, which is not how peer reviews go. So I have to question if that really happened. And it's not the first time Ralph has gave us a crazy, odd story that doesn't sound like it actually happened. See, in his book, he actually talks about being in Edessa and being at a restaurant where 2 Syrian boys were serving, giving him water and coffee. And one of them starts giggling, and he's like, why are you giggling? You look like Isa. You look like Isa. And he was basically creating a narrative in his book of an encounter he had with people in Syria who happened to be proving his book through conversation. Like, just imagine how wacky this story is. He goes to Syria, he meets people there, and they go, "Oh, you white guy from Scotland, you look like Jesus." So he puts it in his book as like, "Oh, look, I got evidence on the ground that even the people there, even they think that I look like Jesus. He must be white like me."
One of the worst things that I've noticed just early on going through his books, he has a quote early on in his book that says, "He who will not eat of my body and drink of my blood, so that he shall be made one with me and I with him, the same shall not know salvation." This quotation may be familiar, but its source is perhaps unexpected and even troubling to some. In fact, the quotation is from the Rites of Mithras, and clearly the early Christian church has absorbed and built upon the earlier rites. Whoa, Ralph, that was some good find. Where'd you find that from? When you actually go and look at Ralph's sources, Ralph has J. Goodwin as the source. Well, who's J. Goodwin? I'm trying to find who this is, because I can't find him anywhere, but it turns out he spelled the name wrong. It's Godwin. It's not Goodwin. And by the way, the fact that he got this from Godwin made me raise some eyebrows, because Godwin never said this. Here's an article from 2007, says that a now defunct message forum, the question was explored. Dr. Andrew Criddle did most of the work and posted his findings. A page of notes which somehow vanished from the web, restored here, rather dense and disappears into various rabbit holes. Godwin, our first port of the call, is the reference, which turns out J. Godwin, Mystery Religions of the Ancient World. So here's Ralph's source, who he spelled the name wrong. It seems that Freak and Gandhi did not trouble to read carefully, for Godwin's words are a Persian Mithraic text, amazingly reminiscent of Jesus' words, states that he who will not eat of my body and drink of my blood, so that he will be made one with him and I with him, the same shall know salvation. But there is no footnote. The actual source is Vermasserin. So the actual source is a publication by a Mithraic scholar named Vermasserin from The Secret God, London, 1963, which means only one thing. There's only one possibility here. Ralph plagiarized this work from Freak and Gandhi. Now, how do you know that, Neil?
Let me break this down to you. Ralph sources Freak and Gandhi for a different verse from a different book, and it right before he gets to the Mithra stuff. And the fact that he uses Freak and Gandhi for another source means he's well aware of them and is already using them. So he admits of knowing them, but he sources Godwin for this particular passage. Godwin doesn't exist, it's Goodwin. Now, Freak and Gandhi have used this exact same quote referencing Goodwin. But Goodwin never said it. That was the whole point of the article. The whole point of the article was exposing Freak and Gandhi for using false information. Vermasserin is the one who has that quote, and it's not even the same. It's a little bit different. So Freak and Gandhi used a false quote. Ralph has that exact same false quote in his book, which means there's only one place he could have gotten it from, and that means he plagiarized Freak and Gandhi. Word for word, exactly to a T, copies the entire thing, and just copies and pastes it into his book. There's no other explanation.
Here's Ralph Ellis obsessively commenting on Jewish scholarship websites. Just commenting, who is Rabban Zohan Zakkai? I know who he was, and I'm probably the only person who does. But you don't want to know, as the answer to that is highly unpalatable. Who led the rabbinic Judaism from Yabni? Who ended the age-old custom of the roast sacrifice? Who was given land around Yabni by Vespasian? Who ruled Judea in the AD 70s? I can predict that you really don't want to know, even if he is fairly famous. And he's in... This is a crazy person. This is a crazy person. He's all over the internet with like spam, just spamming people's comment section on how smart he is and how everyone is wrong except for him.
One in particular that I'll show you right now is he comments on a video that I did with a scholar who is specialized in Mithraism. And he tries to tell us that the name Mithra comes from Mithridates, not the other way around. Now get this. He says it's Mithridates the Fourth, who the name Mithra comes from, which means there was 3 Mithridates before Mithridates the Fourth. Where do their names come from? He says that the god gets their name from the people, not the people naming themselves after the god. But we know through archaeology and history and mythology and every freaking thing you could think of that the god Mithra goes back way before the Mithridatic dynasty. So he just literally just spews nonsense in people's comment section. It's actually kind of a form of entertainment at this point.
Here he is saying that the Galileans are all cross-dressers and eunuchs. And he literally misquotes Josephus. He says, quote, the Galileans indulge themselves in feminine wanton. Notice how he puts those ... dots in there? That's because he's leaving huge chunks out of the actual quote. And he's misquoting Josephus to make him appear that he's saying something that he's not. Here's the actual quote. Notice the difference. Notice how the context is completely taken out of there when you compare the two.
Multiple pointers towards Jesus being a Freemason. We know Freemasonry goes back to the Temple of Solomon and to Solomon himself. That's what it's based upon, of course.
I don't care about that. What I'm saying is, why is Paul writing about Jesus who died and crucified and is going to return?
Well, he doesn't. That's the whole problem. You look at the epistles, and nowhere in the epistles do you get the full crucifixion story. Where is the trial? Where is the scourging? Where is the crucifixion? Where are the women standing around?
Explains that
you get single little mentions that someone has jotted on the end of a verse saying, and he was crucified.
Yeah, there's enough there to know what he's talking about.
There is no crucifixion story within the epistles, and that's a real problem that Saul was not giving.
The book of Hebrews says that Jesus was crucified outside the temple. You don't remember that part? I'm going to show you.
And it's a line that's been tacked onto a verse, hasn't it?
So everything that has to do with Jesus' death is interpolation.
Well, there is no story of the crucifixion within the epistles, is there?
Yes, there is. There's tons of it.
It says, Corinthians, was Paul crucified for you? We preach Christ crucified.
Yes.
Jesus Christ and him crucified.
So what is that? How is that not crucifixion?
That's not the crucifixion story. Where's the story? The story doesn't exist. You've got a couple of little lines
writing a letter
tacked on to the end of a few verses.
It's not supposed to be a story.
Jesus Christ has been evidently set forth crucified amongst you. That's not the crucifixion story.
It didn't happen yet. You're not understanding. There's a simple question. Why would he even say that at all if it didn't happen?
Because these are little additions. They've been tacked on to the end of each verse. There is no crucifixion story within the epistles. And people have recognized this for a long, long time, that this is a real problem with the story. Why was Saul not going around the Mediterranean lamenting this entire tragic story of Jesus being crucified? The trial, Pontius Pilate is never mentioned in the epistles. The trial, Pontius Pilate is never mentioned in the epistles.
The trial, Pontius Pilate is never mentioned in the epistles.
This is Ralph Ellis complaining that the Wikipedia people don't let him change articles. So this is why he's different from Dan Brown. Dan Brown doesn't go around trying to change scholars what they think. He just wants to sell books. Ralph Ellis not only wants to be like Dan Brown where he just makes shit up, but he actually wants people to believe him too. He thinks that Wikipedia is like an open public program that anyone can just go in and change articles and just change the public discourse and just change history because they feel like it. And this is the last thing he said to me before he started to get nasty. He said that Nazareth doesn't exist. And then he challenged me to find one source of Nazareth from the 1st century, which I did within minutes. After that last post is when Ralph stopped talking to me as a friend.
If you're one of those people who recommend Ralph Ellis on your channel, and you think that you're fighting the good fight of truth, you are a hypocrite. Yes, you know who I'm talking to. You are a hypocrite. If you can stand up to, I don't know, Robert Price for something, saying that Robert Price is wrong because of what he said about protest, which I agree. I agree with you on that. He was wrong for that. He deserved criticism. He deserved being called out. But if you think that's wrong, but Ralph is okay, you are a hypocrite because you think that Ralph can get you views. You are on the wrong side of history. You are promoting bad ideas. Shame on you. You've done nothing but made things worse by allowing these ideas to spread. And it's your fault. And I don't even want your contribution if you disagree with me for this.
How often do you brush, Ralph?
3 times a day, sir.
Why must you turn my office into a house of lies?
You're right. I don't brush. I don't brush.
Let's look at a picture book. The Big Book of British Smiles.